Hello and welcome to the Westcity Church podcast. If you'd like to get to know us more, find us at westcitychurch.com.au. We really hope that you're encouraged by today's message.
Well, welcome. I'm Lauren, if we haven't met before. And so this month of June is our Common Purse offering that we take each year in June. Now, this is the first time that I get the opportunity to lead you through this. In previous years, we've had Kiralee oversee the Common Purse as an area. It's made up of a global purse and a local purse. And the heart really of this space is recognising that as you read through the New Testament in particular, the idea that the believers would gather together, not just in physical form, but they'd also gather their resources in order to make sure that there were not those that were going without. And so that can happen at a local level, it can happen at a global level. And just like at the end of our service, we say the go of Christ. And we mentioned that we've come today to be reminded of the go of Christ is the first line. And it's that idea of reminding us that we gather together here on a Sunday, but this isn't the sum total of what it means to follow Jesus. It's certainly a crucial part and one that we hope you find very encouraging. But if this was all that following Jesus looked like for us, we'd be falling short. God's heart for us is indeed that we would think bigger and broader than just ourselves. And during the week, I started reading a book called Mission is the Shape of Water. And let me just read you a quote from here because the author, Michael Frost, sums it up really beautifully. And he says, our mission is to alert everyone, everywhere, to God's universal reign through Christ, by both speech and action, by explaining and demonstrating, by word and deed. We proclaim it with our mouths and we show it with our actions, by demonstrating God's reign through acts of kindness and hospitality, through healing and serving others, and by contributing to the flourishing of a just and equitable society. And he goes on to say, the congregation must be so deeply and intimately involved in the secular concerns of the neighbourhood that it becomes clear to everyone that no one and nothing is outside the range of God's love in Jesus. If the good news is to be authentically communicated, it must be clear that the church is concerned about the rule of God and not about itself. It must be clear, that is, that the local congregation cares for the well-being of the whole community and not just for itself. And so in June, as we talk about the Common Purse offering, it's another opportunity for us collectively together to put some action into play around caring for not just our local community, but our global community as well. And with our global purse, we have partnerships that we create around the world. And each of those partnerships have quite a rigorous application process that they go through. There's a team of people that gather together to look at them, and the board ultimately oversees them as well. And through the funds that we raised last year, we've been able to partner with 3 organisations globally to alleviate poverty in the developing world. All of these projects are Indigenous in that they are led by locals on the ground, and that's really important to us, that we're empowering local communities to actually move beyond the poverty situations that they're in. And so the 3 partnerships that I want to share with you briefly today, I'll focus on global purse today, and then as the weeks go on, we'll talk about local purse and other parts as well. The first one is the Grassroots Rwanda, which is through Foxglove Project. Kerry, you can put that little QR code up if you like, and I thought I'm not going to be able to share in 5 minutes the breadth of it, so if you want to scan that code, you can look at the website later. But this in particular is close to our hearts in that Kelly, who is one of our people here, is obviously very keenly and strongly connected and birthed this project. And it's about empowering women in Rwanda in particular that we support through self-help groups where women gather together in groups, and it's actually surprising how little it costs to support the functioning of these groups, to enable these women to gather together and build an economic stability for not just their family but for their village. It's a really wonderful project, and so I really encourage you to look at that one. The second one that we have, is it Jari Uganda next, Kerry? Beautiful. This is one we've also partnered with for a few years, and Barb, who's the Perth representative, is going to actually come and share the updates for that, not next week but the week after. And this is a fantastic project where we're literally buying chickens and goats and pigs for local families who are breeding them and passing them on to other families. And the updates that they send every few months is actually breathtaking, as you are seeing real impact that we are having. This is a very small organisation. It's managed very well, but the money we send through them, they are incredibly grateful for. And one of the other large donors of Jara Uganda, actually its founding kind of person, if you like, is a woman from Uganda who works tirelessly, multiple jobs, and sends most of it back home because she wants to help her local village. And it's a beautiful, beautiful space, and I can't wait for Barb to come and share with you in a couple of weeks. And then the third project we're sponsoring overseas, which is a new project, is called Step Ahead in Thailand. Now, this has come through us through some connections that we have through UNO, which is Urban Neighbours of Hope. And again, this program is all about keeping families together. There's a group of people that have lived in Bangkok for quite some time and have recognised that one of the biggest challenges there is actually helping families understand that their children are better off with them, because they begin to believe that actually my child is better off if I place them in this orphanage, and that if I engage my child in this orphanage that they'll be better off. But we all know that actually ends in some really horrible outcomes. And so this program is an 18-month program that families come and are sponsored and helped through to help them understand the benefit of keeping their families together. It empowers them economically. It gives them ideas of how they can even work and fund their family. And it's actually a fantastic program that has been developed over many years of being on the ground and seeing what can we do to help with child trafficking in this space. So I would really recommend you click on that QR code if you want more information. And that's a very broad brushstroke. There's not much I could say in this moment. But can I just encourage you to reflect and to be prayerful about this month? There's many ways you can give. If you're not here each and every week, you'll find that there is an envelope with a little window on your chair there. If you are here today and you want to give money to Common Purse, you can put it in that envelope, and the giving box is at the back. You're welcome to place it in there, and we'll know to put that towards the Common Purse offering. The monies that go in there don't get used for anything operationally. It's purely for our global and local offerings that we pass on. So please know, it doesn't go into the general church operations in any way. And it is tax deductible if that matters to you. We will obviously need your details to be able to give you the receipt. So if you are using the envelope today, then please make sure you just fill out your details on there. But the plan will be that in 2 weeks' time, there'll be 2 Sundays where we'll actually collect this offering as part of our communion at the end of the service, as a way of people being able to go away, have a reflect, be prayerful, be mindful. You know, this isn't about equal giving. We're all in very different situations, but I truly do believe that part of loving Jesus well is being open to being about more than just ourselves. You know, this morning I was struck as I was making... I'm mindful, maybe others are a little bit more selfless than me quite naturally. I have to be honest and say that's not always my natural bent. And even this morning as I got up and I made myself my Vegemite toast, and I had this thought of like, you should give that toast to Gavin. That's my husband. But my first thought wasn't absolutely. My first thought was, he's all right. He can make his own toast. And I just thought, how funny that even my own natural response in that moment with someone who I love deeply and care deeply for wasn't just to give him the toast. How silly is that? But it just made me laugh, and it reminded me of how much my heart is naturally inclined to look after myself and keep myself comfortable. And I think this offering is a wonderful invitation for you to begin to allow God to speak to you, and perhaps maybe just gently open your heart. Help us pry open our hands from the things that we hold tightly. And I just wonder whether it's an invitation for you as well to partner with us together and put some funds together and let it be of great impact around the world. There's really a wonderful privilege. And while we all do that in our own ways individually, it's kind of fun to be able to do that together as well and take a journey as a community of people and hear and see what our funds can do together. So please be prayerful in that space. And if you want to hear more, keep coming back, chat with me after, and we've got more we can share as the month goes on. Thank you.
Well, good morning. If we haven't met, my name's Trav. It's a privilege to be able to speak this morning and to kick off a new series called The Cost of Living. It was quite funny hearing Lauren talk about the toast incident. Yeah, well, the funny thing is that we had our own version of that in our house. It was about crumpets, and this morning, Emily had gone out and bought a new pack of crumpets and bread last night, and our kids came in late, and they've absolutely hoovered through the house, through the pantry, including most of the crumpets. So we wake up this morning, and I'm like hankering for honey crumpets, and there's 2 left. And I thought, well, 3 maybe, and I thought at least 2 of those are going to be mine. And Emily was kind enough to our kids to say, no, one of those crumpets is going to Banjo. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, who has a crumpet and a piece of toast? Like, the world is out of whack. I'm lucky to have made it here this morning. Anyway, so yeah, I fully appreciate it wasn't even a willing give. The crumpet was taken from me. You're one step ahead with generosity right there. Anyway, so it's a new series called The Cost of Living. It's a pretty regular occurrence for us, as Kathleen said, to hear the daily news cycle talk about inflation and rising grocery costs and housing pressures and the financial stress that is touching on most households in our community. And the phrase cost of living has become part of our everyday vocabulary of late. And it's real. And it is touching our community. And with that phrase being woven into the fabric of so much of our conversation, it's hard not to let it shape how we think about our future. So this morning, I want to invite us to a particular question alongside those very real concerns. And that is around, what does it actually cost to be alive? What does it cost to be alive, to be truly alive? And in this 5-week series called The Cost of Living, you can hear the intentional wordplay there, because wherever we're at in relation to navigating financial pressures, the gospel continually invites us to consider and to wrestle with what it means to truly live. And it's interesting to live in what I think is probably one of the most wealthiest societies in human history, yet to be someone and amongst many who carries anxiety around there not being enough. And I reckon a lot of us have probably been working longer hours than others in previous generations, often sacrificing relationships that are really central to our well-being and the relationships that give life meaning. Somewhere along the way, I reckon we've absorbed what theologians like Walter Brueggemann and Richard Rohr call this myth of scarcity. That's the topic I've been given this morning. The myth of scarcity. Scarcity of crumpets. It's that fundamental suspicion, maybe we think a reality in our kitchen, that there's never going to be quite enough to go around. And that myth doesn't just affect our bank accounts, it affects our relationships, it impacts on our sense of self-worth, but also the worth we place on others, the value we place on others, even our capacity to trust. And outside broad themes, I'm actually not too sure what others are going to be speaking about. But I do know the intention of this series, or at least today, is to explore what happens when we shift from scarcity thinking to a narrative of sufficiency. Not just with our money, but our time and our attention and our talents and even our love. I'm actually trusting that we'll get fresh eyes on the idea that generosity isn't simply about what we give away. It's about embracing a fundamentally different way of moving through the world. A way that invites us to freedom and connection and ultimately the reflection of God's character in the world. And as we journey through this series, as Lauren has said, we're going to be intentionally connecting it to the common purse. our shared commitment to supporting one another and extending God's love practically in our community and in the world. And we're going to do that because what we're exploring can't just be theory. That's not what this is about. It's about living out the way of Jesus, the go of Christ, in really tangible ways right here and right now. So to get us started, I want to invite you, if you've got a Bible there, I'm not going to be putting this on the screen, or if you've got a phone, to head to Luke chapter 19, verses 1 to 10. I want to base this morning in a story that probably a lot of us are familiar with, and maybe we've fallen into a sense of slumber with because we've grown up with it as kids, and it's the story of Zacchaeus. And what does the story of Zacchaeus have to do with the myth of scarcity? So I'm going to read the story out first, and then we'll just meander our way through. Don't get scared, because we're going to hover quite for a little while at verses 1 and 2, and you might think, are we going to be here till like 2 p.m? We're not, okay? So Luke chapter 19, verses 1 to 10. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. And when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. And all the people saw and began to mutter. I've always wondered what that sounded like. I think we should just have practice. Can you just mutter? Just like, yeah, okay. I feel like that's a pretty accurate reading of the text right there. But they began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost." So we have a story about this guy named Zacchaeus having a life-altering experience after an encounter with Jesus. And one of the things that actually catches my attention about this isn't simply that this is a story about Zacchaeus wanting to see and seek out Jesus, but there's this sense that Jesus is looking for Zacchaeus. And I find that striking because at the start of this story, in verse 1 we read, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Now for readers who are tracking with Luke's biography of Jesus' life, they would know that Jesus is passing through on his way to Jerusalem. Now what's about to happen at Jerusalem? He's about to be crucified. In fact, if you turn to Luke 18, just before this moment, just before this exchange, Jesus, it says in verse 31, Jesus took the 12 aside and told them, "Hey, we're going up to Jerusalem, and everything that is written by the prophets about the Son of Man," he's referring to himself, "will be fulfilled. I, will be delivered over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, insult him, and spit on him. They will flog him and kill him. And on the 3rd day, he will rise again." So Jesus is passing through Jericho. Jericho is about 20 clicks from Jerusalem. And I tell you what, if I was Jesus, I reckon my impending death would be consuming me. Particularly like knowing the kind of death that I'm about to face. Yet even knowing the violent death that is awaiting Jesus can still see people. I've just finished a mediation program through UWA, and one of the things that we were exploring was the way that just our brains, biologically, when we are in fight, flight, or freeze mode, we're in that survival mode, our periphery disappears. We can only really take in what matters most acutely to us. Jesus is walking towards his impending death, and still he can see people. It just blows my mind. But it also causes me to pause and consider that when I ask for the Spirit to shape me to have a heart like Jesus, I think one of the things that we're asking for is the ability to see and the ability and the capacity to respond to the needs of others, even when we're facing hardship, even when we're in the midst of certain levels of anxiety. So Jesus is making his way through Jericho, and we read that there was a man that was there by the name of Zacchaeus. And he was a chief tax collector and he was wealthy. So he meets this guy Zacchaeus, good Jewish name, Zacchaeus, Zachai, and it comes from this Hebrew word zachar. So if you're worried about forgetting that today, because that's going to come in useful at some point, I'm sure. Zachar. All right? So his name essentially means pure or innocent, but what we know is that he actually has a reputation of being crooked and dirty. Names mean something in the ancient world, like they do in certain cultures and communities even today, Middle East and Asian cultures, indigenous cultures, where names carry meaning. They don't just refer to someone, but their reputation. His name means pure and innocent, and this story is about a guy who is crooked and dirty. And we know that because Luke follows up the introduction by pointing out that Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. And he's the kind of person everyone would have hated, because he's not just a tax collector, he's a chief tax collector. So despite being a Jew, he's joined himself with the Roman occupation by means of their taxation system, which was Rome imposing a tax on people to essentially fund the occupying army. So there's a Jewish temple tax that they would have had to pay, but on top of that, now there's a Roman tax to fund the occupying army. And Zacchaeus is in cahoots with this regime as a Jew. But more than that, he's not just your average tax collector who would have gone and added their commission to that additional price that families had to pay. He's the chief tax collector, so he adds his commission on top of that. Tax collectors were one thing, but chief tax collectors? And not only that, Zacchaeus is wealthy, which means what? It means his house is decorated by the sweat and the tears and the blood of others. His clothes and his car, whatever model they had back then, comes at the expense of 20 other families' evening meal. His greed makes others' mortgage repayments out of reach. Unless, of course, one of their kids becomes a slave to another household. Now, how's he got to this point in his life? How does someone get there? And I suspect he's been gripped by the same myth that grips me, the myth of scarcity, a myth fueled by a suspicion that there isn't enough. A myth that I reckon started back in the Garden of Eden. Walter Brueggemann's got this beautiful paper that he's published about how the Bible starts out with a liturgy of abundance. Genesis 1, he says, is a song of praise for God's generosity. It tells how well ordered the world is. And it keeps saying, it is good, it is good, it is good, it is very good. It declares that God blesses and that God gives with vitality plants and animals and fish and birds and then humankind. And it pictures the Creator as saying, now go and be fruitful and multiply And everything in its kind is to multiply the overflowing goodness that pours from God's creator spirit. And as you know, the creation ends in Sabbath, and I love how Brueggemann puts it here. He says, God is so overrun with fruitfulness that God says, I've got to take a break from all this. I've got to get out of the office. But it's not an office of slavery, it's an office of generous abundance. But then I think the myth of scarcity starts to take shape in the Genesis story. Just in Genesis 3, when we hear the whisper of the serpent who says, did God really say? Did God really say not to eat from? Is God holding out on you? Are you sure there's enough? And then relationship breakdown follows relationship breakdown, and we see the myth of scarcity start to take hold as a competing narrative in a world that was birthed out of abundance. And then by Exodus, man, it really has its roots in the storyline. As one nation oppresses another. You know why? Surprise, surprise. We read the words of Pharaoh. They're so afraid that they're going to get outbred by these Hebrews. That there won't be enough. They're breeding like rabbits. So we've got to brutally oppress them and keep them at bay, or we might lose out and lose power. The myth of scarcity says it doesn't matter who I climb over or who bears the cost of my wealth. I just need to make sure I have enough and more than enough. And I think that's probably how Zacchaeus got to where he got to. But my story's no different. My story is no different to his. I just think I'm more sophisticated at hiding it. Because Zacchaeus, he would have had to go face to face with the people that he was oppressing. I get to hide behind transactions through organisations and slick marketing, where I don't even have to connect with the cost of my purchases or how I hold my wealth. This is a deeply challenging story for me. Well, what we discover next, move on with great relief, is that Zacchaeus wanted to see, verse 3, who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. And so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. What we discover is that Zacchaeus wants to see who Jesus is, but he's short. Now, in the Greek, it uses a word that could be translated as young. But then some Greek technicians point out that it says, on account of the crowd. It's almost like it suggests that the crowd is an active obstacle to him seeing and knowing Jesus. So maybe it's because of his height, maybe it's because of his youth, maybe it's because of his profession. The crowd presents itself as an active barrier preventing him from seeing and knowing who Jesus is. And so what does he do? He runs ahead, which in this culture would have been incredibly shameful. For a leader, for a person of authority, for a man in that community to run would have been shameful, let alone climb a sycamore fig tree. And the picture is that shame is all over this guy in a really exposed way. And then we read Jesus reaches the spot. Verse 5. Jesus reached the spot and he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. The crowd's unhappy. We've all had our mutter. But they're not unhappy about a tax policy. I think they're unhappy because here we have someone gripped by the myth of scarcity, inevitably creating scarcity for them, who Jesus wants to identify with. When we operate from the myth that there's never enough, we become part of the machinery that ensures there's not enough for others. They know that. They're part of it. They're on the receiving end of it. And I think they're unhappy because Jesus makes a statement of identification. When you go to someone's house in this ancient community, you are identifying with them and having them identify with you. But that's not the only thing that gets me about this. It's the way that Luke frames it, frames what Jesus says. Because quite literally the phrasing is this: Zacchaeus, today in your house, it is necessary for me to remain. Zacchaeus, today, not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, today, in your house, not in your heart, not in your head, into the very order of your life and how you have ordered your economy, your finances, the way that you live and move through this world. Today, in your house, it is necessary, it is imperative. Your life and the life of others depends on it. Not because of something happening that might happen to you, but what you're doing to yourself and to others. Today in your house, it is imperative that my way of living and moving, this way of abundance and generosity, this way that expresses and takes people back to the very heart of God, that way needs to remain. It's not an overnighter. It's not a bed and breakfast. And then we read, Zacchaeus came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this, began to mutter, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, 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 here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount. Something happens, we don't know what. There's an interaction, we don't get to be privy to that conversation. But somewhere in this interaction with Jesus, something shifts in Zacchaeus' heart to the point where he draws on, there's 3 laws, I won't go into them, but there's one in Leviticus 22, Leviticus 6, there's 2 in Exodus 22 that talk about what happens if you're caught cheating others out of certain things. Essentially, you either pay them back. If you're caught red-handed, in one case, you pay them double back what you've taken. And if you're caught in certain circumstances really cheating people out of things, then you pay back 4 times the amount. And essentially, what we see here in Zacchaeus' response is he places himself in the worst of the worst. He recognizes the depth of what he has done, and he makes restitution, a commitment to restitution. And then Jesus says to him, today, salvation has come to this house. Salvation has come to this house. Deliverance has come to this house. Preservation has come to this house. But what's he been delivered from? Well, I don't think he's just been delivered from individual sins. I think he's been delivered from an entire way of being in the world that was isolating him from others and dehumanizing himself in the process and dehumanizing others. A myth that was slowly killing him and killing other people. I guess I'm offering this story today as a reading of what it means to be delivered from the myth of scarcity. The myth that drives us to accumulate and consume no matter the cost to others. The myth that has us moving at such a frenetic pace rather than resting in the goodness and generous abundance of God. A reading that isn't just about being delivered from something, but delivered to something. Because Zacchaeus in this moment is restored to community, to connection with others. Restored to a way of living and moving and being that is about the pursuit of the common good, that realigns him with what it means to be truly human in this world. And we aren't given the details of what happened in that conversation. He just responds and says, here and now, everything changes. He responds to these words of Jesus, today, not tomorrow, not next week. And then he encounters the God who blesses and gives the vitality of Genesis 1 into his life. The one who promises to hold him in everlasting love. I can only assume that Zacchaeus experienced something profoundly deep in Jesus. Something of what it means to be brought into the fullness of divine love. Not as a servant earning his keep, but as one beloved by God. Invited into the very abundance of God's own life. An encounter that stopped him from grasping what he thought he needed and start living from what he's already been given, what we've already been given. So I wonder, as we make our way to the table today, I wonder how you hear Jesus' words. They're pretty challenging words. Let me say them to you today, again, as if you are up a tree. But Jesus looks at you and says, today, not tomorrow, not next week, today, it's imperative. It is necessary. Today, in your house, not just in your mind, not just in your heart, into the core of how your world is ordered, it's necessary for me to remain. What's the conversation Jesus is wanting to have with you today? It'll be a kind one. It'll be a liberating one.
How good was that message? Thank you so much for joining us. Each week at Westcity, we say a benediction together. We do this because we believe that the purpose of the church is to be a caring community for the world, and that as we go and serve others, we enter into Christ's work of welcome, restoration and healing, both for us and others. We believe that in doing so, we get to see and encounter Christ. So let's say the benediction together. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So we will go out and feed the hungry, go out and clothe the naked, go out and fight for justice, go out and end oppression, go out and proclaim anew the old story, go out and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, and don't even like us. And we'll do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.